I took to TikTok to ask a question that's been killing me lately, and that is, why are the Resident Evil remakes more welcomed and more commonly accepted, and the Silent Hill remakes immediately met with, ugh? Now, obviously, you can take into account things like Capcom's history, Konami's history, but I'm really just talking about the first reaction you have when you hear that there's going to be a remake of a game. And what really inspired this is not only the fact that there is a pending Silent Hill 2 remake coming out, but because Konami announced that they're going to be making more remakes of the Resident Evil games, which isn't surprising, but is kind of unnecessary in my humble opinion, minus Code Veronica, and also not a surprise. And instead of getting pushback, a lot of the response I've seen has been really positive. So why is that? So I took to TikTok and I asked this question, and I will pop the video up here. Here's my question of the day. Why is it that the Resident Evil remakes are met with so much joy and positivity, while Silent Hill remakes are met with so much negativity? Why is the Resident Evil series forgiven for its cash grabs just because its games are good, while even the murmur of Silent Hill remakes makes people immediately skeptical? Silent Hill is put under the microscope for every single company and person working on their games, while Capcom isn't put on that same microscope. Besides the obvious arguments that are made, it's a curious thing in fandom that makes me wonder, why are Resident Evil fans so receptive and Silent Hill fans so resistant, especially when Konami and Capcom have similar histories, though different payoffs? And obviously yada yada Silent Hills, yada 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 Konami, yada 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 Capcom. But I'm talking about the deeper reasoning and just the face value that fans take for these things. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Feel free to comment below, duet, stitch, whatever you want to do. Now, I want to take you through some of our responses and share maybe how I feel about it as well. Wesker's Widow said, "It does feel like Capcom stuff, even when bad, has a little bit more love to it, and they seem more willing to back away from stuff people don't like. The comparison is maybe a little unfair because Konami doesn't really put out any Silent Hill." James said, "Capcom has a better track record with fans. Konami seems to hold its creatives in contempt." And the Elemental Oracle said this, "As a fan of both series and both companies going back to old NES, this holds 100% true. Konami has fallen from grace when it used to be tops." The Grant Kirkhope of Trap said Silent Hill fans are a little bit more nuanced in what they expect from a mainline entry, whereas Resident Evil just doesn't want Resident Evil 6 again. Inky the Blot said, "I think a lot of Silent Hill fans have been feeling burned out a lot, and just a little bitter. I also think that Capcom tends to deliver a bit more often / better. PT really upset a lot of people, plus Konami Pachinko thing got them freaked." Note said, "I think it's because of the themes of Silent Hill versus Resident Evil. It's like zombie movie versus psychological horror movie, if that's a good comparison. So when people hear a property like Silent Hill is being remade, they're worried about the psychological elements and themes, and they want it done tastefully. And for Resident Evil, I see it as a fun zombie game. I can play it and enjoy it without thinking too much. Though Resident Evil has a lot of underappreciated storytelling too, to be honest, which I absolutely agree with." Danny said, "Capcom mostly united its 3 different fan bases. You obviously have some here and there that just do not like the new stuff no matter what, and that's okay. With Konami having it 4 different fan bases all wanting to be right about how Silent Hill should be, with 3 of those groups refusing to unite, and the 4th group made up of people that are willing to agree and have their differences, and people genuinely new and interested in Silent Hill stuff." Which I do agree, our fan base is very, very split as Silent Hill fans. Cornet said, "I think Bloober Team is the reason people don't like the Silent Hill 2 remake. Capcom in recent times handled their legacy titles better. Although Capcom makes plenty of mistakes, they seem to try to learn from them, with the exception of microtransactions, that is. Konami repeats mistakes." We also have fun comments like, "Because Konami." But obviously I want to do a little bit of a deep dive. Barry said, "I mean, Konami couldn't even get an HD port right when the PS3 got one. Capcom had a bad track record for a while there, but they've since built up trust with fans, whereas Konami hasn't really recovered from the later games in the series or the terrible decisions like the Pachinko machines." Ignis said, "Konami's track record, plus how Bloober Team handles their own games and rumors going around that Silent Hill Ascension was written by AI, which has not fully been proven wrong. They have not responded to claims that maybe AI is used to repeat some of the scenarios, even though the story was written by people, so." Very curious about more in depth on that and what Ascension will continue to say about itself. Joshua said, I'm guessing there's like double the fans of Resident Evil, so you're gonna see a broader positive reaction because they aren't diehard like Silent Hill, which I actually will touch on later. Geek Gabs said, I'd argue that Resident Evil proved it can bounce back when they do make bad games, but Silent Hill hasn't had a redeeming game in so long, which I disagree with. I'm actually a big fan of the Western games, though there is still quite a gap between the last Silent Hill game that has come out and now, and we're not going to include Ascension. Jack Borden said, I think Silent Hill is slightly more narratively and artistically driven. RE has just to be a fun game. Silent Hill has a higher bar to clear in vibes. Joe Ween said, Silent Hill has just been torn apart by Konami in recent years. I want to be excited, but it's worrying when Konami was more interested in making a slot machine instead of a good game. Yes came in and said, I feel like the issue revolves around timing and funds. They announced they're making 6 to 8 new Silent Hill games, but they literally don't have money. Them not having any money was the main reason they stopped making Silent Hill games and ended up owning a bunch of slot machines in Las Vegas and other places. We as fans just want them to make one game at a time instead of making poor financial decisions that will probably end up delaying all of the game's release or just not making them anymore at all. It's actually not a true statement. Well, them making a bunch of slot machines is a true statement, but I think financially Konami is doing fine, and one of the reasons that I believe that is because of their merchandise releases, which you can actually see a whole lot of behind me. They have commissioned statues, they have commissioned soundtracks, they've done makeup. Though they may not be doing a large volume of Silent Hill games, they're definitely putting out a lot of Silent Hill merchandise. And regardless of how you feel, they're still making money. Even if Silent Hill isn't like as profitable as maybe one of their other portions, that doesn't mean that Konami's gonna just necessarily pull the plug on it. Obviously there are nuances with that about like how a business decides to move forward with its finances and the projects that it's working on, but I think the idea that Silent Hill is just like losing money and it's just bleeding is just statistically wrong. If it was, they wouldn't have these collaborations with all of these big companies. Even if you're not a fan of the companies, it's still pretty neat to see the type of content that they are putting out there, and I am personally a sucker for good merchandise, so they have been killing it. One of my favorite comments is, because Capcom's been cooking lately. They have been cooking lately, I agree.
Folks, where's the lie?
Hazel said, I've only met one Silent Hill fan in real life, not saying y'all don't exist, and he's so adamant about any remake or new stuff being bad just because Konami let him down before. And Sarah said, I'd say because Konami got adopted by the West and they don't stick to its canon story, so it worries me that they're going to change the things that made me love the original games. This is also an opinion that's wrong. Silent Hill actually has a lot of its original members working on it, and there are a good amount of original members who worked on the Western Silent Hill games as well. I think people are just confused by the notion of like what Team Silent is and don't realize that Team Silent hasn't worked on every single game, especially if you look at the team that worked behind 4. It's radically different than 1. So you would actually be surprised at the involvement that Team Silent has had in the later games, and at the involvement that Team Silent actually currently has in the games that are going on now. I know that may be a kill your heroes moment because you're not super happy with where the franchise is going, but it's a fact. Tony the Tiger's breast implants, I love TikTok, says, I guess people hold Silent Hill to a higher standard because of it being the more deep and serious psychological older brother that's much more than cheesy action horror, which is still great that Resident Evil is known and loved for. One of my favorite things about TikTok is you will have ridiculous names like Tony the Tiger's breast implants, and they will provide one of the most fire takes you've heard. Ethan says, I'm both a Resident Evil and Silent Hill fan, and when it comes to me personally, I just don't trust Bloober Team to do Silent Hill justice. I'll have to make a whole video on my own talking about Bloober and Silent Hill and how I feel about them making a new game, because I actually have a lot of feelings about it, and I've played every single Team Bloober game. So I'll just leave that where it is for now. Amina says, Resi has kind of been known for its B-movie goofiness since its conception. Even Resi's bad mainline games were generally well liked. Konami hasn't really delivered a good game in a hot minute. Their Metal Gear Solid ports were poorly done. Silent Hill Ascension is awful, etc. The RE remakes did get backlash at first. I feel like a lot of people forget that people reacted poorly to Leon and Claire's new face models pre-release, calling them ugly like people are doing now with James. I don't think any of them are ugly. Second that, Amina. Out of all the companies they chose Bloober when they don't have the best track record. Konami has shown time and time again that they don't understand what made Silent Hill well loved and kept chasing the success of True. RIP. I'm actually optimistic about the new games, even with Silent Hill Ascension being the way it is, mostly Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill F, but I 100% understand why people are skeptical. I say all this as a huge fan of both Silent Hill and Resident Evil. Capcom has proven themselves as a company, and it'll take a while for Konami to gain that same trust. Also, there's a sizable chunk of longtime fans who are disappointed by the cuts in the remakes, and there's a lot of new fans who haven't touched the old games, not a bad thing. I feel like once the new games come out, new fans will join, and the OG Silent Hill fans who are more negative won't make up as big of a chunk as a fandom. I really love what Amina had to say, because that is a good point. There are a lot of things that I've missed and that I am missing with how the reception to Resident Evil remakes was, mainly because I wasn't the world's biggest Resident Evil fan when they were announced, and I was just very casually like, that's cool. I bought them upon release, played them, loved them, was impressed, but I was not tracking how the fandom felt. So I do think that's a great point, especially talking about Resident Evil 3 Remake, which is probably something I could talk about because that is my favorite Resident Evil game, and the original Resident Evil 3 is actually one of my favorite games of all time. So I do agree that the cuts are disappointing. There has been some criticism that Capcom has faced, but even then, people seem to be more forgiving for cut content and things like that than they do to, again, just an announcement for a Silent Hill game. Bob says, it's very simple. Capcom has been putting stuff out more than ever. The more stuff you have, the more people forget. Konami just now recently started trying to make games again. They only had Yu-Gi-Oh! And mobile and gambling machines. It's going to be hard to get your fans back when you don't even have consistent releases. I understand what this person's saying, but it's also statistically not true. They may not just be games that we imagine as great games or games that we're interested in, but Konami has still been an active company. And again, their decision to make things like slot machines and mobile games has been a huge influence because of how the Japanese market is. That's not me, defending their decision, but it's just saying that societal context matters for why they made these decisions. And whether or not they're good decisions is kind of up to us as someone who has opinions, but we don't really know the business breakdown of things. In fact, they're putting out some cool stuff right now with their new Contra game, which I'm excited for, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, things like that. I feel like there's a huge age gap between Konami fans because people forget how relevant Konami was in the early days of Sega and Nintendo. Obviously, that's not this era, but people forget that both actually Capcom and Konami are more than just Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Sean said, Konami in general, and especially in the last decade, have ramped up their cash grabs to the point it feels like it's all they do. Capcom has been guilty of cash grabs too, but they're more responsive to the negative feedback those bring. Konami isn't. I would agree with that. I actually think I see Capcom addressing the feedback and fan feedback more than I've seen Konami do it. Daddy Rat said the team behind Silent Hill Remake are not the most liked and are known for over-explaining their games, which doesn't work in a Silent Hill scenario. N says the original first 3 to 4 Silent Hill titles reviewed as good because the original team knew what they were doing. Later titles, from American studios too, lost most of its charm and atmosphere. Konami doesn't bother to make titles for like a decade now, and now they hired Bloober Team for the most successful and popular Silent Hill title. With the kind of bad track record Bloober Team has, and the recent news about them, it seems like Silent Hill 2 Remake will be bad, or just much worse than the original. Silent Hill Ascension is horrendously bad for a Silent Hill title, and Resident Evil never really had this problem because every title has a lot of fans, and people are always saying good things and reminiscing about it. Almost every RE remake is also top-notch, while there are only bad Silent Hill ports in the originals. Again, I disagree. I think that the Western games are great, and also I don't include Ascension and stuff because Ascension isn't a game. If we're gonna include Ascension, I think we also have to include like the movies or the comics in the conversation because that's how far Ascension is from everything out. And that's no disrespect to Genvid because Genvid doesn't want to make a game either, which I've talked about on TikTok. So it's not offensive to say that Ascension is not a game because it's not. Additionally, Resident Evil 6 had a pretty bad reception, and there are actually some Resident Evil games that have had a pretty bad reception. So I find that interesting. Again, these are just like quick off-the-cuff takes, kind of like I'm doing right now. So I'm not expecting people to explain themselves fully in a character limit, but I think it's interesting to see where people's minds are at for what they believe and what they, I guess, don't believe. Octo said, Capcom has an excellent track record with remaking its titles since the GameCube. Konami has historically mistreated the Silent Hill brand, and Silent Hill 2 Remake is being made by Bloober, with a pretty terrible record in comparison. Silent Hill 2 being remade by Bloober is valid for concern. And Movie Buff says, the issue is that Resident Evil listened to its fans and course corrected after 6, but Konami doesn't. I'm a huge fan of both. And the interesting thing about that is, how has Konami not course corrected? The game hasn't come out. Were they, or did people, or are people saying that maybe it's similar for when Resident Evil 7 came out? Were people really excited for that? Pre-trailer. Once we all saw it, of course, we were amazed. But pre-trailer, wasn't the concept of another Resident Evil game maybe stressful? Zelda says, Capcom cares about the end product, plus remaking Silent Hill is almost a fight you can't win. The originals, especially 2, were such a labor of love, and Konami outright stated that these new games are to promote the movie. Also, Bloober Team is a horrible dev for Silent Hill, given their history. Again, we'll go into Bloober Team another time in another video. For now, I suggest Markeke's video on the Medium, which I will have popped up right here. She actually does a really good take on Bloober and where she lies with it, and though I don't always agree 100% with her takes, she's one of the creators that I respect the most, and where I would send people if they're wondering, why are people complaining about Bloober? You can also watch her opinion on the other Bloober games as well. Again, we differ in opinions on some of them, but she's very articulate, intelligent, and is a great source. Final Fantasy VII Sephiroth says, good question. I think it's because both fan bases are different personality types. I think Resident Evil fan base is much bigger, meaning more open-minded people. Resident Evil is action horror, meanwhile Silent Hill is psychological horror, and I think you can only do so much with Silent Hill. Resident Evil has potential for broader gameplay. And to that I say, it just depends on who's coming up with the story, because Silent Hill could truly be anything. God's Boyfriend says, also I think because Silent Hill is kind of more complex in its narrative, it also attracts more pretentious and annoying people, thus the contrariism. I did not say that right, but I'm gonna stick with it. But also the first 3 games set a standard that just couldn't be met, especially considering the neglect the series has had for like forever. Swoosh Expert says, in the public, Konami does not treat their creators well, and references Kojima, which I would actually reference a plethora of other people before I reference Kojima in the way that Konami has treated the people that it's worked with, but that is also another story for another day. And seems to care more about pachinko and profit over making good games again. I really don't think it's that much deeper. People often say they want another dev that cares to handle Silent Hill since Konami hasn't done a great job. One of my favorite comments is saying that Resident Evil fans are dogs and Silent Hill fans are cats, which I think is very fitting, although what animal would you make the Resident Evil and Silent Hill fandoms? Crouton says, Resident Evil games are camp and fun, Silent Hill games are psychological dramas, also Konami in general sucks as a company while Capcom doesn't. Resident Evil games are allowed to be cliche and mainstream, it adds to their character. Silent Hill games were acknowledged for their individuality. Very, very true. I do like that opinion, that they are known for their individuality. And Mhora says, isn't it to some degree because of their output? Look at the titles in Resident Evil versus Silent Hill. Silent Hill fans have such few projects they can claim. And I'm just going to use that to jump off into my point and what I wanted to say in regards to Silent Hill and why I think a lot more of the negativity is attached to it than the positivity that's attached to Resident Evil. And it does have to do with fan base. One amazing thing is that the Resident Evil franchise has, I don't even know what the number it would be for how much it's outsold the Silent Hill franchise. Resident Evil 5 alone, several years ago, surpassed selling 12 million copies, and the Silent Hill franchise, so not just the game, the whole franchise, has only sold 9 million copies. So there are Resident Evil games, standalone games, that have sold more than the Silent Hill games, which is insanity. And part of that's also ports. The Resident Evil games came out on a lot more than the Silent Hill games did, and are more readily available than the Silent Hill games are. So it's interesting to see like where the fan base comes in and how sales affect that and how sales affect the narrative. Because I do agree there are more normie fans, which I'm not even saying that to be mean, I just mean there can be more people who can casually enjoy Resident Evil because they don't have to cough up $200 to play the first game. I largely think part of the issue that people have and where this gets twisted in this Capcom versus Konami debacle is that Capcom is more better received publicly and has done more work on their public image in the last few years than Konami has. Capcom kind of took like a apology route as they were kind of gearing up for games like Resident Evil 7 and other titles that they've announced since and continue to come out with. Whereas Konami just kind of trudged forward like they said something really mean to you and are just never going to acknowledge it ever again. I think it's very, very interesting because I think for the fandom, we want some kind of acknowledgement for how we feel and how we've been neglected, kind of like you do in any relationship, which may be ridiculous to ask for a gaming company, but Capcom was able to address people's concerns and make them feel involved in the conversation and make their creators feel valid and make the people who are interacting with their games feel valid, also including streamers and their events, like things like that. Capcom has definitely shown up in a large way, which makes us think positively of Capcom as a company and makes us trust the games that they're making. Whereas with Konami, they've done nothing recently to earn our trust that hasn't had a big fat dollar sign behind it. And when I say that, it's that although their merch has been phenomenal, again, I've bought most of it, the fact that I have to buy to interact with something that they're putting out is a little bit of a bummer. I'm not saying that they should give free stuff out, but there's not much acknowledgement for the creators in the Silent Hill community. Even big creators that I've seen who have been covering the series for years definitely don't get the attention that I would love to see them see. So, closing thoughts, I think part of the reason, in my humble opinion, after hearing all of your guys' opinions, that Silent Hill is just met with so much more negativity with its remakes not only has to do with who's working on the remakes, but also has to do with the public perception of Konami and the percentage of people who have actually played Silent Hill. And I truly mean play it, not just read the wiki or watch playthroughs of it, even though that is very valid, but there aren't a lot of people who really had their hands on the game, and that's unfortunate because that is due to the fact that they haven't ported it and the prices of games these days. Whereas Capcom has re-released their games on every single system possible. You can walk in and play that game anywhere. You can play it on VR, you can play it on your Switch, which is insane, and you can enjoy content of streamers playing it, and you can watch events where your favorite streamer is maybe included in a clip of it. So my biggest question going forward is actually not will the new Silent Hill games be good, how will Konami shift the tides and gain favor in the eyes of its fans again? I'll be curious to see how they continue to do this. And now I just wonder what you guys think. Why do you guys think that the Silent Hill games are met with more caution when it comes to remakes than the Resident Evil games are? And how do you think Konami, similar to Capcom, will gain favor in the eyes of its creators? Thank you guys so much for watching the video. You can also catch me live on a plethora of platforms if you check the bio down below. And if you're interested in hearing my thoughts about Team Bloober or anything else, just let me know down below. Have a wonderful day.